The fine notice was duct taped to my front door like some kind of middle school prank. Big red letters. Violation. I stared at it, already knowing it had to be her Loretta Mayfield, HOA president, self-appointed neighborhood dictator and destroyer of joy. The offense. Flying an American flag in my own front yard. I'm Conrad Prescott. I served 8 years in the Army, now I work logistics at the steel yard. I moved into the sleepy Oak Ridge estates thinking it'd be a quiet place to raise my 9-year-old son, Grady. I hadn't counted on Loretta treating the HOA like her personal kingdom. The flag had gone up 2 days earlier. It wasn't anything flashy, just a standard 3-by-5-foot American flag on a pole mounted near the porch. I'd raised it with Grady, told him what it meant, what it stood for. He'd been beaming with pride. That pride didn't last long. I was sipping coffee on the porch when Loretta came marching up the walkway like she was invading Normandy. Blonde bob bouncing, clipboard in hand, fake pearls strangling her neck. "Conrad," she said, her voice honey dipped in fake sweetness. "You'll need to take that flag down by tomorrow. It violates our exterior Dacre conformity clause." I set down my mug. "It's the American flag, Loretta." "You really gonna tell me I can't fly it?" She tucked her clipboard close like it held national secrets. "It's not about the flag, it's about uniformity. We can't have residents putting up whatever they want. Next thing you know, people'll be flying football team banners and garden gnomes in bikinis." "That's a stretch. Conformity keeps property values high," she said, already turning back toward her golf cart. The next morning, that ridiculous fine was taped to my door. $500 due in 10 days or they'd tack on late fees. I wasn't about to let that slide. I spent the rest of the day digging through federal statutes. It didn't take long. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 federal law states that no HOA can ban a homeowner from flying the U.S. flag on their property. Period. As long as it's displayed respectfully, which mine was. I printed out the law, highlighted the relevant section, and dropped it off at the HOA office drop box with a handwritten note. Before you fine a veteran for flying the American flag, maybe read the law first. But Loretta wasn't one to back down when she was wrong. The next week, she doubled the fine and sent out a newsletter to the entire neighborhood, calling me a non-compliant resident who is challenging the integrity of our community standards. Grady came home from school asking why his friend's mom was saying we were bad neighbors. That's when it stopped being an annoyance. That's when it got personal. I installed a camera on the porch and started documenting everything. Her unannounced visits to my lawn, the passive-aggressive notes left on my mailbox, even the time she told my next-door neighbor, Leo, that I was creating division. She didn't know it yet, but she was building my case for me. By the end of that week, I had enough evidence to make a real move, and I wasn't going to just stop at getting the fine removed. I was going to make the HOA pay. The first sign that something bigger was going on came from across the street, Mrs. Patel, who ran a small bakery downtown, waved me over one evening as I was walking Grady's beagle, Rosie. She looked around before speaking, like she was afraid someone might hear her. "Conrad, I got a fine today," she said, eyes tight, "for having flowers in my front yard." "They said marigolds aren't on the HOA's approved list." "Marigolds?" I blinked. "They're not even tall enough to block a lawn gnome. They said it disrupts the visual harmony of the street, but I've had them for years." That was the first of 6 conversations like it over the next 3 days. A young couple a few houses down got fined for putting up solar-powered pathway lights that weren't pre-approved. A retired bus driver next to them, Mr. Quinn, had been slapped with a violation for having a garden hose coiled on a wall hook instead of hidden from view. It was a pattern low-income or immigrant families, single parents, older folks, easy targets, people less likely to fight back. I started a spreadsheet. Names, addresses, fines issued, date received, violation listed, and whether there was any prior warning. I used a separate tab to track HOA board members' addresses, voting records, and public meeting notes. By the end of the week, I had over 20 entries. And something else popped out. Several of the worst-hit homes were on the fringe of the neighborhood, right next to the wooded land owned by a private contractor. A developer, that got my attention. I called my buddy Marcus next. We served together overseas, and he now worked in real estate law over in Danton. I emailed him the spreadsheet, along with scanned copies of the notices I'd collected. He called me back that night. "Conrad," he said, voice low and serious, "this isn't just harassment. It looks like they're trying to create a paper trail, build a case to declare non-compliance across a section of the neighborhood. That way, the HOA can trigger a clause in the bylaws allowing them to seize neglected properties for community redevelopment." I felt my stomach twist. They're planning to take people's homes. If they can show repeated violations, yes. Technically, they can issue a lien for unpaid fines. With enough of those, they can foreclose. I stared out the window. Grady was sitting on the floor, reading a comic book, completely unaware just how close some of our neighbors were to losing everything. "Could that land be sold to a private builder?" I asked. "Easily," Marcus replied. "And if it's bundled together as a redevelopment project, they could profit off the sale and say it's for the good of the HOA." That night, I pulled every HOA meeting record from the past 5 years. Most residents never attended, but I'd been to 2 since moving in. The minutes were dry, mostly lawn maintenance budgets and pool repairs, but one entry from last spring caught my eye. Loretta had introduced a motion called Community Enhancement Initiative. It passed unanimously. In the notes, it vaguely mentioned strategic expansion and redevelopment of underperforming parcels. I checked the date. It was 2 months before the fines started rolling out across the edge of the neighborhood. It wasn't about flags or marigolds. It was about land. I bought a second camera and installed it on a tree facing the road. I also upgraded my porch cam to record audio. Then I printed off flyers and dropped them off in mailboxes across the neighborhood, inviting residents to a community legal awareness night I was hosting in my garage on Saturday. No HOA approval needed. That night, 23 people showed up. I had a projector running off my laptop, folding chairs borrowed from Leo, and Marcus on video call walking people through their rights. Folks were angry, not just about the fines but about being manipulated. A retired school teacher named Joy admitted she'd paid over $2,000 in penalties last year because she was afraid of getting evicted. A single mom said she'd been skipping meals to cover a bogus landscaping violation. One guy, a former city clerk, brought something explosive. He held up a folder. "I used to work with public records," he said. "I pulled the property filings. The HOA has already submitted a rezoning request to the county for sections of our neighborhood. They're calling it Oak Ridge South Redevelopment." The room went dead silent. I called Marcus again the next day and asked him what it would cost to file a cease and desist against the HOA for harassment and unlawful lien threats. He said he'd do it pro bono if I could get a few more residents to sign on. I got 45 signatures by the weekend. The cease and desist landed on Loretta's desk Monday morning. I made sure it was hand-delivered and posted a copy on the neighborhood Facebook page. My cameras caught her reaction. She stood on my lawn, phone to her ear, pacing like a caged animal. Then she looked straight into the lens and mouthed something I didn't catch. The next day, a black SUV parked outside my home for 3 hours. No plates. Probably a scare tactic. My porch cam got the whole thing, then things escalated. Mrs. Patel's marigolds were ripped out in the night. Leo's car windshield was smashed. Someone poured bleach on Joy's front lawn, killing the grass in a perfect rectangle. All of it was reported to the police, but nothing stuck. No eyewitnesses until Thursday. That night, my tree cam, which had infrared, caught a man in a hoodie and gloves walking into my yard with a crowbar. He went straight for the flagpole, tried to wrench it from the mount. When it didn't give, he pulled out bolt cutters. He never saw the second camera. The porch cam got his face when he turned toward the light. It was Nalan, Loretta's cousin. He'd been on the HOA's landscaping committee for 3 years. I called the police. This time, I showed them the footage and my spreadsheet. I handed over copies of the cease and desist, the rezoning request, and the list of residents reporting property damage. I also gave them the HOA meeting notes and the developer's name linked to the adjacent lot. They took it seriously. By morning, a detective was at my door. She asked for the full case file. I gave her 2 USB drives and a hard copy binder. She promised a formal investigation was underway. Loretta must have sensed the walls closing in because that afternoon she called an emergency HOA board meeting. I attended, as did over 100 residents. Most had never stepped foot inside the community center before. Loretta tried to speak, but the crowd wasn't having it. "Why are we being fined into foreclosure?" someone shouted. "Why are your relatives vandalizing our homes? Where's the money from last year's community fund?" I stood up with the binder in my hand. "We have evidence of targeted enforcement, illegal property seizures, and a coordinated attempt to drive residents out. And now we have police involved." Loretta tried to shout over me. "This is slander, you're poisoning the community," but her voice cracked, and her pearls, those heavy pearls she always wore, were visibly trembling. A man in the back stood up. I motioned a vote of no confidence in the HOA leadership. Another shouted, seconded, hands shot up across the room. I counted at least 80. That was more than enough. The bylaws required a simple majority at a special meeting for a leadership removal. Loretta stormed out. By the following week, the board had been dissolved. The county confirmed the rezoning request had been withdrawn. And the developer? Turns out they'd backed out once the investigation started, but the final blow came 3 weeks later. The county prosecutor held a press conference. Nalan had been arrested for vandalism and trespassing. Loretta was under investigation for fraud, harassment, and conspiracy to commit unlawful seizure of property. The HOA was slapped with a civil suit by 8 residents, with Marcus leading the charge. They settled for over $200,000 in penalties and damages, my flag. Still flying. The new HOA board, elected by popular vote, passed a motion to protect residents' rights to display national symbols. No more fines. No more intimidation. Grady asked me that night why the neighborhood suddenly felt less mean. I told him the truth. Because when good people stand up, bullies lose. A month after the emergency HOA vote, Oak Ridge Estates felt like a different place. Not perfect, but different. Neighbors waved more. Kids lingered in front yards again. And for the first time in a long while, nobody was afraid to paint their shutters or plant something they actually liked. But that peace didn't come without fallout. Loretta Mayfield had vanished from public view the day after Nalan's arrest. Her house sat dark for weeks, the porch light never coming on, mail piling up in the box until the post office stopped delivery. A for sale sign popped up without warning, but it disappeared just as quickly when the county seized the property during the investigation. I wasn't expecting any more surprises, but then Detective Callahan showed up at my job on a Wednesday afternoon with a thin manila folder and a look that meant something serious. "You got a minute?" she asked, glancing around the steel yard office. I nodded and followed her outside to the lot where trucks idled in the sun. "There's something we missed at first," she said, opening the folder to reveal a printed email chain, names, dates, and subject lines. "Thought you'd want to be the first to know." Most of the messages were between Loretta and a man named Richard Halberd. I didn't recognize the name, but the email signature identified him as a regional development consultant for Halberd and Finch, a commercial real estate firm based 2 counties over. "They're not just developers," Callahan said. "They're under investigation in 3 states for colluding with HOAs to wrest control of land under false pretenses." This time, it looks like Loretta gave them internal documents, resident demographics, property values, board voting records in exchange for campaign donations. Campaign donations, I asked. She filed paperwork last spring to run for city council, Callahan said, but she needed a platform. So she pitched herself as a community revitalization expert working to remove blight from residential zones. That's the language from her draft proposal. And by blight, she meant people's homes, I said, jaw tightening. Halberd and Finch promised to fund her campaign in exchange for exclusive rights to purchase any foreclosed properties the HOA repossessed, Callahan continued. They even had architectural renderings ready for a shopping plaza and 2 rows of luxury townhomes. I exhaled slowly, trying to process it. So this wasn't just about power, it was business, dirty business, Callahan nodded. Real dirty. We're charging her with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations and obstruction. And that's just the beginning. A week later, I was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. So were 5 other residents, including Joy, Leo, and the bus driver who'd been fined for his hose. The court session was closed, but the judge allowed us to submit documented evidence, including the video footage and Marcus's analysis of the HOA's legal overreach. Loretta's lawyer tried to delay the proceedings, claiming her client was suffering from severe emotional distress and was not mentally fit to stand trial. But the court ordered a psychiatric evaluation, and by mid-autumn, she was indicted on 6 federal charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law. What shocked everyone was how deep the rot went. The county commissioner's office released a report in November showing that 2 former HOA board members had accepted personal payments from Halberd and Finch. In return, they helped push through the rezoning applications Loretta had submitted, using their influence to fast-track reviews and suppress objections from residents. One of those board members, a man named Everett Crane, had quietly moved out of the neighborhood 3 months before the vote of no confidence. When the sheriff's office caught up to him in a gated lakeside rental, he was found to have over $50,000 in unexplained deposits in his accounts. He flipped immediately, offering a full confession in exchange for leniency. The new HOA board, led by a retired accountant named Darlene, took immediate steps to repair the damage. They hired an outside auditor, launched a full financial review, and began refunding improper fines to residents. But the most dramatic change came when they voted to eliminate the HOA's authority to place liens on properties without court approval. It wasn't just a policy shift, it was a structural dismantling of the very power Loretta had abused. One rainy afternoon, I found myself standing outside the county courthouse beside Marcus. Reporters had gathered behind yellow ropes, cameras pointed at the steps. Loretta was scheduled for arraignment. "You sure you're okay being here?" Marcus asked. "I started this," I said. "I'm seeing it through." The side doors opened, and Loretta stepped out in a gray suit that didn't quite fit. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, and her eyes scanned the crowd but never landed on me. She looked older, smaller. Like the weight of what she'd done had finally settled on her shoulders. When the prosecutor stepped to the podium and read the charges, the words hit harder than I expected. Mail fraud, civil conspiracy, extortion. It was no longer just about bad rules or fines. This was systemic abuse targeting vulnerable people, manipulating laws and using fear as currency. Loretta pled not guilty, of course. But the trial was scheduled for the spring, and with the paper trail the DA had, nobody expected her to walk free. Back in Oak Ridge Estates, change was steady and deliberate. The new board held monthly open forums where residents could propose rule changes. People actually showed up. One guy brought donuts. A retired paralegal offered pro bono help drafting new community guidelines. Even kids got involved. Grady's class planted a memorial garden near the entrance with a plaque that read, "Our neighborhood, our voice." I didn't want recognition. I hadn't done any of it for that. But one evening, Darlene knocked on my door with a thin box and a handshake. "We took a vote," she said. "Unanimous. We thought you should have this." Inside was a framed certificate declaring me an honorary steward of Oak Ridge Estates. Beneath my name it read, "For standing when others couldn't and speaking when others were silenced." Grady stared at it for a long time before asking, "Does this mean you're like the boss now?" I chuckled. "No, buddy, it means we all are together." The flag still flew on the porch. But now, there were others joining it up and down the street, some American flags, others military service banners, even one with a giant sunflower stitched into the center. Nobody got fined. Nobody got warned. Because when power returns to the people it belongs to, fear loses its grip. And in this neighborhood, we finally remembered what freedom really looks like. The trial started in early March, held in the old stone courthouse, downtown, the kind of place where every footstep echoed like it'd wait. I wasn't scheduled to testify until the second week, but I attended every day anyway, sitting alongside the other residents who'd been targeted. We didn't talk much in the gallery. We didn't need to. Just being there sent the message. The prosecution opened strong. They led with the paper trail. Emails, internal memos, and financial transfers between Loretta and Halberd and Finch. The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Carla Mendez, laid out the case like she was unspooling a rotten rope, every not another calculated abuse of power. And the jury. They were locked in from the start. By the fourth day, they'd brought in one of Loretta's former allies on the HOA board, a man named Victor Langford, who'd quietly taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony. Victor was in his 50s, with the posture of someone who'd lost every ounce of pride he ever had. He didn't look at Loretta once during the questioning. "She told us not to worry about the legality," Victor said, voice low and flat. "Said the homeowners wouldn't push back if we kept things quiet." The idea was to rack up violations and let them default. "And what would happen to the properties if they defaulted?" Carla asked. "They'd be absorbed under the Community Redevelopment Clause, then resold." Resold to whom? He hesitated. To Halberd and Finch. They already had the contracts drawn up. We were just supposed to make it look like due process. The courtroom murmured. The judge banged her gavel once. Loretta's defense attorney tried to paint her as an overzealous volunteer who'd been manipulated by the developers. But that fell apart when a forensic tech testified that Loretta had edited documents to fabricate violations, going so far as to alter timestamp data and insert before photos taken from unrelated properties. Then came the video footage. The prosecution entered the porch and tree camera recordings into evidence. When the video played of Nalan attempting to destroy the flagpole, the courtroom held its breath. Then they showed a second clip, Loretta standing in the street, speaking into her phone, saying, "He's not getting away with this. I'll make sure that flag's gone by the weekend." The jurors didn't look at Loretta after that. When it was my turn to testify, I only brought one item with me, the binder. The same one I'd carried to the emergency HOA meeting, updated with every new piece of evidence and every resident's signed statement. "Mr. Prescott," Carla said, "can you tell the court why you installed security cameras on your property?" "Because I had a feeling they wouldn't stop with fines," I said, and I was right. "Did you ever receive a legal notice informing you that your flag was in violation of state or federal law?" "No." "Just threats from the HOA. They claimed it violated local daycare standards, but federal law says otherwise. And what happened after you pointed that out? They doubled the fine, spread false claims about me in the neighborhood, started targeting others." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The jury had the timeline. They had the video. They had the emails. When I stepped down, Loretta finally looked at me, not with anger, not even with the cold disdain she used to wield like a weapon. She looked hollow, like someone who'd built a trap and somehow fallen into it herself. The trial lasted 10 days. The verdict came back in 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Loretta to 6 years in federal prison with no chance of parole for the first 4. She was ordered to pay restitution to over 50 residents, totaling nearly $400,000. The court also levied a civil penalty of $250,000 against the HOA to be paid out of its remaining funds and any sale of Loretta's seized assets. But that wasn't the part that stuck with me. It was what the judge said just before delivering the sentence. You used your position to exploit trust, suppress rights, and harm those you were supposed to serve. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control. And control, unchecked, becomes tyranny. After the sentencing, the county stepped in to oversee the HOA's transition. The board's authority was suspended until a full audit could be completed, and a neutral third-party administrator was appointed to handle daily operations. The residents, meanwhile, got to work. One Saturday, I helped hang a new sign at the front entrance. Not a banner or a flag, just a clean wooden marker with gold lettering that read, Oak Ridge Estates, a community of equals. At the next neighborhood meeting, Darlene announced that the HOA would be restructured as a voluntary civic association. Dues would be optional. Violations would require a 2/3 community vote to be enforced. No more anonymous complaints. No more secret meetings. A local high school civics class agreed to help write the new charter as a project, with input from the entire neighborhood. Even Grady submitted a handwritten suggestion. Let people paint their houses any color they want, as long as it's not super ugly. The laughter from that line lasted a good 30 seconds. The restitution checks started arriving in late spring. Mine came in a plain envelope, accompanied by a formal letter from the court. I didn't cash it. Instead, I handed it over to the community fund we'd started during the investigation. The money helped cover legal fees for residents still chasing their claims. It also paid for repairs to vandalized lawns, broken windows, and the community garden that had been trampled during the worst of it. That summer, something unexpected happened. Grady called me outside one morning, barefoot and still in pajamas. "Dad, look," I stepped out and froze. Half a dozen houses up and down the street had raised flags. Not just American flags, either. There were state flags, military service flags, even one with a bald eagle clutching a wrench. No one had coordinated it. No one sent a flyer. It just happened. I spotted Leo across the street, hands tucked into his jeans, watching with a small nod. "It's not about flags, is it?" Grady asked. "No," I said. "It's about what they tried to take from us and what we didn't let them." By fall, the last of the lawsuits were settled. Halberd and Finch dissolved their regional office and quietly issued a public apology. It wasn't much, but it meant their name wouldn't darken another neighborhood in our state anytime soon. Loretta appealed, of course, twice. Both were denied, and Oak Ridge, it flourished. New families moved in, drawn by the community's story. The local paper ran a feature titled "The Neighborhood That Fought Back." We even hosted a town hall on HOA reform, with residents from other counties attending to learn how we'd done it. But for me, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about the small things. Watching Mrs. Patel plant orchids next to her rebuilt flower bed, seeing Joy read on her porch again without checking over her shoulder, helping Mr. Quinn install a homemade bird bath without worrying which rule it violated. And on Veterans Day, I found a small envelope tucked under the flagpole. Inside was a single card, no name, no return address, just a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for defending your country and ours." I didn't need to know who sent it, because I already knew it was one of us.